So good morning, everybody. Happy to see a full room. My name is Andrea Voigt. I'm heading Global Public Affairs in Danfoss Climate Solutions, and I'm going to take you through a few slides to show you what we can expect with new regulations, policies, etc. coming. So, So I wanted to show you this. I was very surprised last week when I arrived in Brussels airport. I saw this very big poster on the wall, and generally you would not see such type of posters in an airport. So I took a photo, and it said, "Next destination, a European industrial deal." And you would wonder, the usual traveler, what could people be interested in the next destination as a European industrial deal? And I thought this is really interesting because it shows how the policy generally that is coming out of Brussels is evolving and is trying to get the interest of the consumers, of the people in the street, of the travelers at Brussels airport. And the dots underneath this poster, which are difficult to read on the photo, say safeguard Europe's competitiveness, implement the European Green Deal, and keep high-quality jobs for European workers in Europe. So that really is quite a strong announcement and quite a strong indication how we can probably see evolve the policies that come out of Brussels and that shape very much the environment in which we are. And then it ends with saying the future of prosperity must be made in Europe. And then you can, of course, wonder, really? Are we set up for that? Do we really have the right frameworks as well for this? To be seen. So let's just take a step back to 2019. So this lady, I guess everybody knows her here, being in Germany, that's the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. And back in 2019, she spoke about the man on the moon moment for Europe. And that man on the moon moment was supposed to be the European Green Deal, like connecting decarbonization, climate neutrality, Europe being a climate neutral continent by 2050, connecting this with making Europe attractive, competitive, able to compete on an international scene and market. Has this been achieved? Well, we certainly have a lot of regulations and policies that are part of the European Green Deal, but if you look at what I just showed earlier, moving from a Green Deal to an industrial deal, you may wonder. So if we look at what happened in this past Commission mandate, in the past 5 years, in Brussels, we call this a tsunami of regulations related to sustainability and to carbon neutrality. And I can't possibly go through all of those different policies and regulations because there are so many. There are a whole bucket of policies and regulations related to products and applications. And here, for example, REACH and the PFAS discussion is one of them, which we have certainly all heard about here in this forum. Then we have all the different measures that are related to energy and to emissions, and here we have a new Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. We heard this morning Melanie from the European Heat Pump Association speak about the importance of the uptake of heat pumps. That is very much related also to the energy performance of buildings, for example. It's also related to eco-design to a certain extent, to the efficiency of heating equipment. And then we have the Energy Efficiency Directive, which looks very much at decarbonizing, for example, district energy networks. Again, a very close link to our industry sector. We do have the Renewable Energies Directive, moving from fossil fuels to renewable energies. And again, there's many links to what Melanie was saying this morning on the European heat pump market and how heat pumps will develop and what is needed for them to develop and to take off. And then a lot of other measures like emission trading, carbon border mechanism, the F-gas regulation, of course, one big topic which everybody talks about. And walking over the fair, I'm seeing a lot of CO2, by the way, which is certainly driven to a large extent also by the F-gas regulation. And then we have a third bucket of measures, which is very much related to disclosure obligations and to finance. And here, and it would be too long in this forum now to explain this more in detail, but just to say those measures like the EU taxonomy, for example, those measures are supposed to categorize whatever we do in terms of economic activities and to define, is this sustainable, yes or no? And if it is classified as being sustainable, then a company can declare that as a sustainable economic activity aligned with the European taxonomy. And that in turn will help the company to get, for example, access to more attractive loans, to get lower interest rates, to issue green bonds, and so on and so forth. So that bucket is a very important one, which came with the European Green Deal and which very much is also linked to the financial markets and financial actors. So we have all of these many different measures. And then you can wonder, okay, so the overall target is to reach climate neutrality by 2050. Okay, good. We have tons of regulations and of policies. We have to achieve 55% emission reduction by 2030. Now, are we getting there, is the question. Well, if you look at the graph here, yeah, sort of, but probably not. There's quite a gap between the 55% greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030 that we should reach and where we actually right now are moving towards. If you look on the right-hand side, if you look at the purple line at the bottom, that's the trajectory that we need to do in order to achieve 55% by 2030 and climate neutrality by 2050. And if you look at the blue line, which is the top line, then you see where we are right now. So the gap is substantial. And then you may wonder, okay, we have all of those policies and we are still so far away, so what's wrong or what needs to change? And that's where the new commission mandate comes into play, or where they hope they can make a change with moving from the Green Deal towards a clean industrial deal. So moving from a narrative which is mainly driven by decarbonization towards a narrative which is much more driven by the business case and by making sure that whatever we do in terms of achieving climate neutrality and in terms of decarbonizing, that this is also financially attractive, economically attractive. So that's at least the plan. So what we see right now what is happening in Brussels is that the new commissioners are getting their mission letters, so basically their job description for the coming five years, and where they announce sort of, okay, in those mission letters, it's announced what they should focus upon. So what is it that will be their priorities in the coming 5 years? So this is not exhaustive at all. I just tried to pick some key priorities and to give a little bit of a flavor in which direction this is going to go. So if we look at the climate side of things, or the climate commissioner and their priorities, then you can see that, of course, climate neutrality remains a top priority by 2050, and we will likely see another target by 2040, which would be a 90% emission reduction. So then we would have 3 milestones: 55% in 2030, 90% in 2040, and then climate neutrality in 2050. So that's the overarching goal, basically setting the scene. And then there are quite a few other measures that would come in support. I highlighted here in red, because this is spelled out in the mission letter, to scale down and phase out fossil fuel subsidies, because that is one of the things which is distorting the ratio between the prices of electricity and fossil fuels gas. It's also what Melanie said earlier in her presentation about the heat pump market. As long as that ratio is not below 2, ideally, it will be difficult to be really competitive and to make the economic case for the heat pumps as well. So that is one important point in the climate sort of mandate. Then if you look at energy, at the energy mandate, there are quite a few things in that mandate which are really important and which are super important also for our industry here. And that is a strong focus on energy system integration, on the decarbonization of heating and cooling, and on increasing energy efficiency. So these 3 points, I think, can have potentially quite a big impact on our sector. Specifically, if we look at decarbonization of heating and cooling, which represents like half of the total final energy consumption in Europe, and where we really have a major opportunity to make a big contribution and to turn this also into an economic opportunity, into a business case for all of us. So there really a strong focus by in the mission letter for the Energy Commissioner, where I think we have a good opportunity as a sector to make an impact. Then if we look at the industry portfolio, there of course it's all about European competitiveness, supporting European industries, making sure that we have the right infrastructure in place in Europe. And then I highlighted in red one point which I found interesting, because it's also spelled out like this, that the chemical industry package should be reviewed and to simplify REACH. And that, of course, has an impact on PFAS as well, which is one of the big topics dominating the discussions here as well. So that's on industry. And then finally, people is a very important point as well. And people in the sense of we need skills, we need skilled people to master the energy transition, to master, and that's relevant for us, the refrigerant transition as well. And then we also need those partnerships to make sure that we attract enough workers and that industry has the manpower to achieve all those things and to remain competitive. So then, as I said earlier already, finance is going to be probably an even stronger driver. I mentioned the EU taxonomy beforehand. And if you look at the financial markets, they all have, the banks, the investors, the pension funds, etc. They have disclosure obligations, and they will have to show, okay, what is it that I'm financing? What is in my portfolio? How green is my portfolio? So there is quite some pressure coming from regulatory side and from a policy perspective to green their portfolios. And then, of course, also pressures from the markets as customers, consumers want to become more green. And as also environmental risks need to be mitigated. So a bank, for example, that would finance, for example, an installation in an industrial site which is in an area which is going to be flooded tomorrow, then of course that's a huge environmental risk. And so those things need to be much more integrated in terms of how financial markets react. And I think I'm quite convinced that this is going to be a very strong driver to move towards phasing out fossil fuels, for example, or reducing the use of fossil fuels and other consequences. So what does that mean? I'm just looking at the time. So far, so good. So I'm seeing those 3 big priorities. And one, I think, which is really important is this technology neutral perspective. Now, technology neutrality is a bit of a philosophical question. Some people love it, other people don't. But whether we like it or not, this is something which is also spelled out in those mission letters to the commissioners, that solutions should be technology neutral as long as they contribute to achieving decarbonization. And so that means basically that we may see a less dogmatic approach maybe, a less restrictive approach, more flexibility as well in terms of the solutions available. We will likely see also carbon being the main denominator. So whatever you do, you just have to reduce your carbon footprint, and that you can achieve in many different ways. We hear a lot about hydrogen, obviously. In Brussels, we call it sometimes the hydrogen hype. Nuclear being mentioned very often again, renewables obviously, and then electrification as one very important avenue forward, and that's electrification of heating, and that's very relevant for our industry here, but then of course also electrification of transport. Then implementation and enforcement will be very important, so all of these dozens and dozens of regulations and of policies that came out of the last 5 years, commission mandate, all those now need to be implemented. So maybe we will see a certain shift from Brussels towards the national level, because the national governments now have to implement this on the ground. So this is going to be a strong focus. And then we have affordability as the third big axis of priority, meaning that mainstreaming climate neutrality targets should always come with dedicated finance as well, so that we can take the the people with us and that it is a business case, as I said earlier. We can also probably expect quite some support for vulnerable households, for housing, for affordable housing, where again, I think from our sector's perspective, we can make quite a contribution. So finally, we have some foreseeable, I think if we look at this overall picture, we have some foreseeable trends, how this may impact our sector, the refrigeration, air conditioning, and, I see there is a mistake, and heat pump sector, sorry, I typed twice refrigeration. So what we think is that waste heat recovery is probably going to play an increasingly important role because it is readily available. It's not being used to the extent it should be used, and it can make a huge contribution to reducing the energy use or the energy that needs to be generated for heating. So there is a big axis, I think, which we will see more and more. Then heat pumps, even if we see a dip right now, heat pumps are going to be one of the key solutions to decarbonize heating and cooling, and that's reversible heat pumps, so heat pumps used for heating and for cooling. We will probably also see quite a strong emphasis on building automation and control systems, not the least because this is being pushed by the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which has quite some specific requirements on the deployment of BACs. Of course, refrigerants is an ever ongoing topic, which I think will be very important in dominating our industry also in the years to come as we move forward with the refrigerant transition, moving forward towards more and more natural refrigerants as well, CO2, propane, etc. Flexibility and storage, I think, is going to be a very big trend with more and more renewables coming into the system. Then we need that flexibility to cope with those renewables, and we need to valorize the flexibility as well, as was also said this morning in the European heat pumps presentation. And then finally, efficiency. Efficiency has always been an important topic. It's very difficult to really put a finger on it, especially when you talk to policymakers, because it's such a vast topic. But generally speaking, I think energy efficiency is going to be one of the big pillars as well moving forward. So finally, will all of this work? Well, we'll see in the next 5 years how the context will be shifting. We still think, and certainly that's something we can all support, I would say, that the future of prosperity should be made in Europe. Being in Europe here, I think we have a great opportunity here. And with possibly coming a framework coming that is a little bit more industry friendly as well, and that combines the decarbonization and the environmental perspective with the economic perspective, I think we have a good chance here. And if you want to hear more about all of this, or if you have any questions, then please come and visit us at our booth, Hall 7, booth 251. Happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much.